everybody be seated, please. Mr. Zanganay, you can proceed.
Thank you, Judge. Your Honor, Mr. Clark, Mr. McCall, Ms. Kaplan, Ms. Norris, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. For the last 3 weeks, the government has been selling you their story, okay? And we're gonna call this story the Sigfredo Garcia house, okay? Not to be confused with the Donna Adelson house, the Charlie Adelson house, the Harvey Adelson house. It's the Sigfredo Garcia house, and they want you to buy what they've been selling. My job is to be the inspector of this house. My job is to point out things that they don't want you to see. We're going to talk about the problems with this house. We're going to talk about the problems with the foundation of the Sigfredo Garcia house. We're going to talk about problems with the wiring in this house. We're going to talk about problems with the plumbing and with the roof of this house. Now, the foundation of the government's case, unequivocally, without a shadow of a doubt, is Luis Rivera. How do I know this? Because the government said it in their own closing, that he is the linchpin of their case. He is, and the definition of linchpin is one that serves to hold together parts or elements that exist or function as a unit. He's the only person that tells you what he believes happened that day. The only one. So who is Luis Rivera? Let's talk about who he is. Luis Rivera, and the government tries to downplay this, but it's important. It's important to know who you're listening to. It's important to know who's on that stand and who is he. He's the head of a criminal organization, one that he got indicted for racketeering. He's been a crown of the Latin Kings, the first crown, for almost 15 years. Why does that matter? Because he is a person that has criminal connections in his own criminal organization. He told you that. He got up there and he goes, I have 100 people just in the North Miami tribe of the Latin Kings. 100 people. And that's a small tribe in a nationwide organization that is peppered throughout the state of Florida. Well, why does that matter? Well, if you recall, during my cross-examination, when his phone, Luis Rivera's phone, was intercepted in his federal RICO case, in a 1-month period, he solicited the assistance of Latin Kings to do 3 violent criminal acts. 3 in 30 days. Now, how do we know Sigfredo Garcia wasn't someone that he listened? Well, we know this. We know that Luis Rivera was indicted. We know that he pled guilty to a federal indictment, and that we know that when the arrest happened in this case, he was in prison. He was in federal prison. Was there any evidence to suggest that Sigfredo Garcia was in federal prison? Quite the contrary. Sigfredo Garcia was working at a finance place when federal agents went to approach him. So what does this mean? It's not on that indictment. He's not part of Luis Rivera's criminal network. Because during the 30 days, the federal government was listening to every phone call and every text message that Luis Rivera said, there was not one that implicated Sigfredo Garcia. Because if there was, a reasonable person would assume that he would have been on that RICO statute, and he wasn't. And what does it also show? That he has a network of people that he can talk to. And by talk to, I mean discuss criminal acts. Because that's what they do. This is not a charitable organization. This is a violent gang. A violent gang that carries out violent crimes. Listen, I asked him, I go, so you're self-described Jack Boy. Remember when he said that? What does that mean? He goes and he robs people. And who does he rob? He robs drug dealers, probably innocent people too, regular people. I don't think he differentiates. And what's his take on a regular robbery? What did he say? Between $10,000 and $20,000. Why is this important? Because when you go rob somebody, you don't get paid up front for the robbery, right? You get the spoils of the robbery. That's what you get. Luis Rivera had indicated that he makes $10,000 to $20,000 after every robbery. Luis Rivera told you that he is no longer associated with the Latin Kings, right? Then he told you that he has fear that there's going to be retribution against him by the Latin Kings, right? And this fear was so deep-rooted that he got up there and he says, man, I'm in protective custody. They're going to kill me. Well, if you recall, we introduced a letter that he sent to Ms. Kappelman. And the date of this letter is November 3rd, 2016. A hop, skip, and a jump away from when he started cooperating and took his plea deal when it became public in mid-October. And after 2 weeks in isolation, because they put him in isolation to protect him, what does he tell them? He wants out. He wants out of isolation. What's really important is I want you to read the last line. He goes, it is ridiculous that I am in confinement only because, what's the last two words? The last three words. I helped you. Not that I told the truth, but that he helped them. Because that's exactly what he did. And they don't want you to think that. They want you to think that he came forward and told you 100% what took place. Now, he was arrested in May. He got appointed an attorney. The attorney gets the evidence. They go over the evidence with him. And unlike Ms. Kawas, who had to travel from Miami and see Miss Magbanua, Chuck Collins and David Collins are locals. His local lawyers went to see him and they went over the evidence. The majority of the evidence that you see. And this happened before he met with the government. So if the government wants you to think that she didn't spoon feed him anything, well, she provided the evidence to his lawyer who went over it and said, Mr. Rivera, you've got a big problem here. They have you, just you, on your cell phone going up there in June. And they have you renting a room. They have you renting a Prius. And Mr. Rivera, you're a Latin king. And when it comes down to it, that's an aggravator for the death penalty, which they were seeking. So, you want me to cut a deal? Yeah. And listen, I do call it the deal of a lifetime. Because what did he have to do? I initially came and I told you it was 7 years. It's less. He has to do 19 years and he's doing 12 and a half in federal custody. Now, federal custody is different than state custody. It's a lot easier, a lot better. Luis Rivera, as the government indicated, you testified about 10 times. Recorded statements were made by Mr. Rivera. The government recorded it. Do we have any of those in evidence? The October 4th statement. Are you guys going to be able to go back in the jury room?
Mr. Zanganeh, I think you know, as I've explained to the jury, those are hearsay statements and they're not admissible in evidence. That's not an appropriate argument to make. As I've explained to you, jury, if there's something inconsistent in those statements, that's fair game and they present it. But those statements, along with the police reports and every witness statement in this case, are hearsay statements and they're not admissible in evidence. You may proceed.
He made 10 statements. 10 statements. My client was interviewed for 2 minutes. You heard that statement. They played that audio for you, right? You remember that? When they went to interview my client, you heard that one. right? They played it for you. They bought it out, they marked it as an exhibit, they pushed play, and lo and behold, exactly what was said. Luis Rivera's testimony is what you take it to be. There's also jury instructions that give you guidance on how to determine how to judge a witness. There's an enumerated list that you're going to get to go back into the room with you. It says weighing the evidence. Number one, did the witness seem to have an opportunity to see and know the things about which he testified? Did the witness seem to have an accurate memory? Was he being honest and straightforward in answering our questions? Did he have an interest in how this case ended? Did his testimony agree with the other testimony and the evidence in the case? Has the witness been offered or received any money, preferred treatment, or benefit in order to get the witness to testify? And there are a few others, which include, is the witness a convicted felon? 5 felony convictions. And did the witness at some other time make a statement that's inconsistent with the testimony that he provided in court? Well, you heard what he provided in court, and you know there's about 9 other statements. Luis Rivera gives you a story which starts like this. On June 3rd, Sigfredo Garcia approaches him and says, I'm doing a robbery, come with me. And he goes, okay, sure, let's go. And the track on that purported date, here we go, starts June 4th, their cell tower records get at 1:30 in the morning in Miami. And then on his trip, 3:13 a.m. Okay? So somewhere in between, he starts heading north. Now, what did he tell you? He said, yo, listen, Sigfredo came to me and said, look, we got a robbery to do, let's go. So Luis Rivera wants you to believe that he went and purchased a gun from a black guy in the hood, okay? And then went and bought bullets. And then his testimony was, and then we dipped. Look at his phone records. Look at what it says. Do you think there's a gun store open at 2 in the morning? These are reasonable things. You have to say, that doesn't make sense. You know, listen, the whole buying a gun thing, we deem that to be 100% completely not believable, okay? This is a person that has extreme knowledge of how crimes work. He's part of a national-wide criminal syndicate. What does he have to do? Hey, bro, listen, I'm coming up to Tally, get me a gun. Get me a tool. That's what they call it, a tool. Get me a tool. He's not going to ride with a gun from Miami all the way up to Tallahassee. He's a convicted felon. That's a crime. That's a major crime. So he wants you to swallow that, okay? And then he says, well, Sigfredo also bought a gun, which was never recovered. There's no evidence of it. But he says, you know, because he wants culpability to go both ways, Sigfredo bought a gun too. Okay, so what did you guys do? Well, we did coke, and we drank the whole way up. Now listen, at 3:13 a.m., say it's about a 7-hour drive, taking breaks from Miami to Tallahassee, give or take. How long is this drive? Let's just say he left at 3 o'clock and he gets there at 12:30. It's a 9.5-hour drive. Sergeant Downing pulled him over, right? We know that for sure. There's a record of it. That record shows that Luis Rivera was the driver of the rental car. And Sergeant Downing, when we asked him, was there anybody else? He's like, nah, that's what I check when no one else is in there. Nobody else was in the car. Right? And what else did he say? He goes, well, you know, he'd been a trooper and doing other law enforcement for about 8 years before this. If what Luis Rivera was telling you was true, then Sigfredo Garcia must have consumed 3 to 4 grams of cocaine during this ride up Now, sure, he doesn't have a glass table to do cocaine off of, so what does that mean? Probably took out his key. Did key bumps. There'd be coke all over him. This would be a disastrous, probable cause to search the car, which he purported had guns in it. Does that make sense? Does the evidence suggest that? Trooper Downing, let me tell you, 9 o'clock in the morning, a guy that's been on cocaine all night, someone that's been trained as a police officer for 10 years, guess what he's going to do? Get out of the car. Right? Probably coke all over his face. You know why he didn't say that? A, he wasn't in the car, and B, it didn't happen. Are there records to show where Secreto Garcia was during this time? Magically, they're not. They're able to get everything they need, but on a trip that's material to their case, they don't have it. Just like when I asked the financial officer, I go, well, what about his bank records? Well, we had to search archives. We're not going to do that. God forbid. God forbid we make one other call and get information because it could hurt us. Luis Rivera, their linchpin, has married them to a story. This is the foundation of their case. So they're going to say, well, it's not just him. Shadrick Nobles comes forward. Now, Shadrick Nobles came in January of 2016, right? January of 2016, a year and a half later. They called him in because they think that he's part of a murder. What do they tell him? Well, tell us what happened. Well, do we know exactly what he said? They did say it was videotaped. What he testified to was that my client, after a whole day of consuming a toxic or maybe even a fatal amount of cocaine, wanted more cocaine. And he flags him down without knowing him in Tallahassee, when he's allegedly next to a gang member that has connections all over the state. Does that make sense? You know, in the world of improbable things to do, if you have Luis Rivera, somebody that wants to stay under the radar, allowing this to happen, doesn't make sense. You know what also doesn't make sense? Shadrick Nobles, by chance, magically, on the next trip, sees him on the road. Right? I mean, your antenna must have jumped up, going, wait a minute. Is that a coincidence? That's a crazy coincidence. Shadrick Nobles told the cops, yeah, you know, I bought him a little coke. Did he get charged for that? No. Now, our position is, Shadrick Nobles probably didn't get him a little coke. He probably got Luis Rivera, through him or one of his associates, a lot of coke. Or bought a lot of coke, because that's what it was. You know, when you go up for a day trip, that's a drug deal. And that's what this was for Luis Rivera, a drug deal. Shadrick Nobles admitted it. Now, he changed the amounts, and he changed the intention of it, but doesn't that make more sense? That he's going up there for a drug deal? Right? Because if you're going to go, and remember, hold on, let's go back. Let's go back to what Luis Rivera said. Around Orlando, which let's say it's 8 o'clock in the morning, after about 5 hours, being on the road for at least 5 hours, his alleged best friend goes, oh, you know what? Just to let you know, it's not a robbery. We're going to kill somebody. Okay. The head of an organized crime unit, okay? A crime gang. What is he going to say? What's the first thing that he's going to say? Where's the money? You think he cares about who they're killing? He's going to say, where's the money? How much do we have now? I'm going to kill somebody for free. Right? Does he say that? Does he ask, where's the money? I mean, we've all seen movies, hitmen take half the money up front. But no money is given. Or more importantly, who's paying us? Who's paying us? Because if I'm going to go kill somebody, the person that's paying us knows who I am, they may need to be a loose end. Does he say any of these things? Candidly, don't you think that's the first? These are the conversations that are going to be had on this monstrous trip. At least even from 8 a.m. till 12:30, right? Aren't they going to discuss where we're getting the money? Who's the person that knows about this? Who's paying us? Did he mention that at all? Wouldn't that be the first thing a criminal in a criminal organization would want to know? Not who we're killing, how am I getting paid? Right? Where's the money coming from? And then, if Segredo would have been like, I don't know, do you think he would have done it? We'll get back to some more of this later. But this foundation of their case, their own linchpin, that's weak. And weak is an understatement. I don't think you can believe anything that he says out of his mouth. And if you do, go ahead. But remember what I am discussing with you to discuss back there. Because this matters. You know, just because there's a theory and there's evidence, there's common sense. Common sense has to fall in there somewhere. And we're only at June 4th. Okay? We're only at June 4th in a trip up. What Luis Rivera testified to was that they get there around 12:30, and then they went to bed. Right? They've been up all night, according to him, drugging and driving and drinking and God knows whatever else he was saying. June 4th. They stay in Tallahassee a night, June 5th. And then they head back bound June 6th. And Luis Rivera claims that there's no records of where he stayed because they bribed some homeless person, which they clearly didn't do on July 17th when he rented a room under his name, and which clearly they didn't do, or Shedrick Nobles didn't do, on July 18th when he rented a room under his name. There's holes and questions on this trip that have to be screaming, I don't know if I can take Rivera for anything that he says. And let me culminate Rivera by saying one thing. His purported best friend, he picked him out in a second, right? Oh yeah, that's the guy that did it. He asked him a question about the Latin Kings. Oh man, why you gotta bring them into this? Do you think he's protecting somebody? Maybe one of his Latin King brothers? Government said they cross-referenced Rivera's phone records with other Latin kings. You don't think he called another Latin king from June to July? In October itself, there's 3 crimes that are caught on that wire that he confessed to, that he admitted to you. But that does not form the theory of the government's case. So Control, Alt, Delete. Don't think about it. Don't think about that, guys. Don't think about it. Because that could create questions they don't have answers to. Now, the government wants you to believe someone that's inherently unreliable, and that's Luis Rivera. And they said, yeah, he's a bad guy, but that's your bad guy. That's their bad guy. I know bad guy. I got pulled over. I got cut off today and going down Monroe Road today. I thought that person was a bad guy. Nah, that's a bad guy. That's the worst of the worst. You know, the government's theory is that they believe Luis Rivera when he said, my client's the shooter. Do you think he would have gotten the deal that he got if he admitted to being the shooter? What's a shorter distance when you pull up behind somebody in their driveway? The driver or the passenger when someone's parked in the driveway? The quickest person to get there is who? Someone that just walks right out? Gangster style? Bang, bang? Someone that has to walk around the car all the way around. And it's so funny that that investigator Yao said gangster style, because who's shooting who? A gangster killed Dan Markel. Luis Rivera killed Dan Markel. And you know what? It's common sense. 2 and 2 has to equal 4. He's admitted to being involved in these types of actions. That's his indictment. Okay. So let's get to a little bit more common sense. Let's get to the numbers, okay? I'm going to give you $35,000 supposedly when Luis Rivera finds out that this is an actual murder. He even said, yeah, you know, people think I kill people. Wink, wink. So I'm going to go ahead and do this murder for 35 grand, right? Because I'm going to be the shooter. And then, I don't know if it's a coming to Jesus moment or a lie. He says, well, I guess I didn't feel like doing it because there's kids involved. You don't think the victims of his robberies have kids? You think he cares about kids? If you do, believe his testimony. If you do believe that he thought, because this man, this innocent man, had 2 kids, that he pulled back from a murder just to re-engage it a month later. It's kind of shaky. It's kind of unreliable. And then here comes the best part. After refusing, allegedly, to do the murder, he claims that on the way up, on June 18th, or during the trip of July 18th, that my client did it, and in addition to getting the money he was told he was going to get, got a bonus for being an Uber driver. That's a real expensive Uber ride. You got to think, if my client hired him, why would my client even go up there? Reasonable. Hey, listen, I want you to go take care of this thing. Here's money. Go. Why would you tag along? This is not a 2-man job. It's a 1-man job. You don't see movies where you have 2 hitmen go to something. It's 1 guy with a briefcase and gloves. That's what you see. You don't see a tag team hit squad. It's 1 man. Now, there's evidence that Luis Rivera admitted to. He's a drug dealer. There's evidence that Charlie Edison does drugs. Government's like, well, there's no phone records, so there's no way that they could know each other. Miami Beach, they both live. Luis Rivera lives in Miami Beach. Charlie Edison goes to Miami Beach. Luis Rivera sells drugs. I don't know if it's outside the realm of possibility. If one day when he was visiting Katie McBannel, he would say, can you get me some coke or some weed? Rivera gets called. Rivera comes by. And a deal struck. That foundation's weak. It's beyond weak. It needs help. So let's go to the wiring. The electricity, the spark, or the motive in this case. Government wants you to believe that my client agreed with Miss McBannel to go commit a murder. Okay, let's break this down, okay? Let's start off with the first thing that we've learned over and over in this case, is that Secreto Garcia could not stand Charlie Ames, right? I mean, not only has there been testimony about it, there are text messages. There's one where Charlie Adelson says he wants to take, on July 25th, 2014, Charlie says he wants to take me deep sea fishing. I'll agree with Ms. Calvin, that's a joke. You know why? Then at first he wants to kill me. He wants to take me out in the middle of the ocean, knock you out, have the fishes take care of you. July 25th, 6 weeks before this purported June trip that my client went on, that there's no evidence of. And so we have July 25th. Now remember, they broke up in 2013. She goes out with him New Year's Eve, going into 2014. Okay? We know that Charlie Adelson knows who my client is because there's a text message in late April, the one I just talked about. So what does that mean? He knows about my client. Luis Rivera, what did he say? I'm talking about that, I'm sorry. What did Luis Rivera say? There was a time in the summer before the trip that Sigfredo drove up to a restaurant where Katie and Charlie Adelson were, and he wanted to run him over. So, wants to kill him. Charlie Adelson agrees that he wants to kill him. And then on July 1st, on the wiretaps, you hear Charlie Adelson say, reminiscing about a time where he had jet skis and how, the guy with the 2 kids, my client, July 1st, angrily pulled his car behind Charlie Adelson and confronted Charlie Adelson. So, definitely no April 25th, definitely no July 1st, and there's cell bright text messages between Charlie Adelson and Catherine McManua on July 2nd, highlighting the July 1st incident. Okay, so hates his guts in April, hates his guts in July, right? That's the evidence. It's uncontroverted. Even Miss McManua's good friend, the young lady that's in the picture with Lady Adelson, I forgot her name, but even her, when I asked her, how angry was he about this? She gave a scale of 10, 11, and then 12 when I asked. Okay? Hates his guts. This reverts back to my initial question about Luis Rivera, if asked, hey, you want to go do a job? If Catherine McManua, as she's dating a man that drives a Ferrari, flaunts his wealth, and his slick back hair for everyone to see, if you Google him, you see his face, you see his cars. If Catherine McManua came and said, listen, I got a job for you, it's $100,000. Don't you think his first action is going to be from who? Who's paying me? Who's doing this? You heard Sigfredo's own temperament and his own words when the FBI went to talk to him. Pretty calm, collected, thought-out person. Where's this money coming from? They want you to believe that Katie either withheld this kind of information, the kind of information Sigfredo Garcia would spend the rest of his life or even death to commit an act not knowing information. And listen, this isn't, hey, honey, can you go down to the store and get me some milk? No questions asked. Yeah, sure, no problem. Can you pick up diapers? Yeah, sure, no problem. Can I borrow $100? Yeah, sure, no problem. You want to make $100,000 for killing someone you don't know? Huh? They don't want you to think about these pieces because what do? They cut Sigfredo out of the equation. Because we know for sure how he feels about Charlie Adelson. We know how the government feels about Charlie Adelson. And Wendy Adelson, and Donna Adelson spent the first 21 minutes of their opening statement talking about the Adelsons. Now, if Luis Rivera got the deal of a lifetime, and after a year or 6 months, they arrested Charlie, and he admitted it was just me and Luis. Yikes, right? What a pill that would be to swallow. But we don't know. Because the only people here, the only people that have been arrested, the only people in front of you, my client, Ms. McManus. They're painting a picture with missing pieces. I'm trying to open your eyes for you guys to discuss some of these missing pieces. That's all. That's all I can do. My job is to point out problems and ask you to talk about them. But don't you think the issue as to why Catherine McManus, they told you, she's barely making any money. I'm going to give you $100,000, and then here's the $1 million question again. What money am I getting up front? How do I know I'm getting paid? Hold on, the guy, pardon my language, the guy that's banging you is going to give me $100,000? How do I know? What kind of deposit am I going to hold up front? There's no testimony to any of this. I guess it was COD, cash on debt. That doesn't exist. The government made a big deal about this bump. We've all heard about it. Not the bumps that Luis Rivera was claiming my client took in the 6-hour car ride, but the telephone bump. And the telephone bump really lets you think about where the government's mindset is. Because who did they, they could get 10 wires. They could apply and get wires for anyone that they believed was involved in this case. They believed Charlie Adelson was involved. They got a wire intercept. They believed Catherine McBanna was involved. They got a wire intercept. They believed Sigfredo Garcia was involved. No wire intercept. Now, let me tell you why you should be thinking about this, because even according to the government, Luis Rivera, the person whose family's allegedly extorting him, is closest to who? Sigfredo Garcia. Right? Wouldn't you want to hear what he did or didn't do as a result of who he called or didn't call? But they didn't even get they didn't even get a wire intercept for Sigfredo Garcia. They didn't want to listen to his phone. They wanted to listen to hers. And wherever Charlie Adelson is, probably at home, watching live, in the comfort of his home. They played a tape, a wire intercept call. I think it's called L or J, where you can hear my client was angry. He probably found out the night before that the love of his life had been talking to her ex. And he'd probably been out drinking, because it's 8 o'clock in the morning and his speech is a little slurred. And what's the first thing he says? They didn't play it in the clip. He goes, I'm not going to make this call. And then she gets on him and he says, I'll make it, but he never does. He never makes the call, and they claim that he made a call and a hang up. That's not a call. There's no conversation there. Does he appear to have a real interest in who's purportedly extorting him? Because remember, it's him too. His name is allegedly on this piece of paper, which we've never seen. But they say his name is on it. And if he was a real gangster, the way that they're portraying him, a real murderer, and someone's extorting him, I would assume he'd make a lot of calls. I would assume he would make a lot of calls to a lot of kings. Yet, here we are, with 0 calls to listen to. Now let's talk about the plumbing. What stinks? Okay? Ms. Kappelman was kind enough to indicate to you guys during her closing that I did receive a check from Ms. Magbanua. And she says, well, I don't represent Ms. Magbanua, but guess who I represent? Her husband. I don't know what kind of shade that was to throw at me or what kind of insinuation it is that they were trying to make, but look what they're doing. Attempting to make me appear to be improper. They're trying to shine a turd, pardon my language, in Luis Rivera, and then they're trying to discredit me. Now, you got to think to yourself, why would they do this? Well, I'll tell you. There's an innocent man that was murdered, a father of 2, law professor, was killed in his driveway in cold blood. And at no point do I want you guys, with this analogy or anything I say, to minimize from what happened to Dan Markel. That happened. And Luis Rivera has admitted liability in this case. Now, let's talk about what stinks. Let's talk about his plea deal. 6.5 years is what he will have to serve in Florida State Prison. 6.5 years. Because he said that my client did a murder. And like I said before, he's the only one that says it. He's the only one that says it. He's the one that says that my client got out and ran around and shot him point blank. Well, what smells about the government's testimony with regards to that? Remember Inspector Yao, who's really tall. He was the ballistic expert, the gun guy. So before, when he had the one point of entry, 49 inches, he said someone between 5 feet and 6 feet tall could do the shooting. 2 weeks before trial, came up with a new theory. came up with a bunch of things that he was assuming to do what? Increase the height of the shooter. What? This is something you did a few weeks before trial? And what he did is he took a bunch of variables that don't exist. And he even admitted it. And what did the government say in their closing? Well, it was a tall guy. That's not what the evidence shows. The evidence shows it was someone with the one point of entry at 49 inches, someone between 5 and 6 feet tall. They say it's a taller person because Luis Rivera says it's a taller person. Because Luis Rivera received a 19-year prison sentence where he only has to serve 6.5 years for killing Dan Markel. Now, there are factors that a jury has to take into consideration when making a determination as to someone's involvement in a crime. I want to highlight a few things. The government says Sigfredo Garcia swapped cars. They say it like it's a fact. It's not. The evidence is he rented 2 cars. And the evidence shows that on June 4th, Luis Rivera was arrested in that car. That's what the evidence shows. The person from the rental car didn't remember there being a trade, just remembered a second transaction. Why is this important? Well, the government's like, well, he rented a car. It appears that my client was doing a lot of car renting before this. So much so that the owner of the Prius rental place wrote down my client's name and knew his number. Why is he renting cars? He can't afford a new one. He bought that horrific looking 1984, I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of the color, Monte Carlo, for a few $100. That car broke down, he bought a Nissan, put $1,500 down. These are not extravagant purchases. He bought a motorcycle for $600. Luis Rivera jacked those numbers up. He said 3,000. He said 2,800 and 3,800. Government had every opportunity to investigate the actual price. We have the documentation on the titles. But they wanted you to believe Luis Rivera's number because it makes it seem like he spent more money. Let's go to the Prius rental. Right? Luis Rivera's testimony. Sigfredo wasn't there. How do we know he wasn't there? Because the owner says, I wrote down Sigfredo's name, because I know Sigfredo because he rents cars for me. Renting a car is not a crime, okay? What do we know? We know that that Luis Rivera rented the car. Okay? We also know that Luis Rivera had the gun. Whether he got it down here from a black guy in the hood, or if he got it from one of his cohorts in his nationwide criminal syndicate on his 9-hour drive, he had the gun. And he admits it was only his gun, that he had one gun. One gun. One gun was taken on the murder date on July 18th for the trip. One gun. We have a hotel rental. By Luis Rivera. We have a Prius in the Premier parking lot. And you have cell tower data that cannot conclusively place my client's phone in that parking lot. Now, look at the phone records. It's important. And remember Lewis's testimony. He said Sigfredo had his flip top, a flip phone, a burner phone, okay, during that trip. There's an incoming text message and an incoming unanswered call at between 9:30 and 9:50 in the morning. We have the Prius being out of the line of view at Premier for 6 minutes. The government wants you to believe that Luis Rivera and Sigfredo Garcia are in the car together because there's a photograph, a screenshot or a still shot of the Prius driving with a passenger that appears to be wearing a white t-shirt. Right? It's July, it's summer, and I would venture to say that if you go to any basketball court in Tallahassee, half the kids on the court will be wearing white t-shirts. Wearing a white t-shirt in the summertime is like being a Knowles fan at your stadium. It's not uncommon. It's not like it was a checkered shirt or there was indications of it. If you look at the picture, it's a short sleeve shirt. If you look at the picture on the camera at the bank, it's a long sleeve shirt. There's no direct evidence to put my client at the murder scene other than Luis Rivera. And I believe that we've made our position on him very clear. Can I just get a minute, Judge?
Certainly.
Okay. Gonna get back to Sergeant Nobles. I forgot about him. This young man told you on the stand that he lives in his car. Okay? And I don't think it's unreasonable to believe that someone that travels and lives in their vehicle, there's nothing wrong with it, rents rooms from time to time. And I think that this person who admitted to being part of a drug deal could have been facilitating another drug deal on the July trip. Now, here's an important question. Did they prosecute him for admitting to that drug deal? No. There is a jury instruction. Oops. Oh, right. There's a jury instruction. It talks about how. Now this is still under weighing the evidence, okay? And you guys have a copy of this. You'll be able to take it back to the jury room. You must consider the testimony of some witnesses with more caution than others. For example, a witness who claims to have helped the defendant commit a crime has been promised immunity from prosecution. Right there. I'm going to shift just back to Sergeant Nobles. He went and told cops he was involved in a drug deal, and he wasn't arrested. He assisted the prosecution while he was on probation. No probation violation, no new law violation, nothing. He got a pass because his testimony fits their story. And the jury instruction specifically tells you if someone is given immunity from prosecution, that's something you should consider in weighing their evidence. Now, are there other things to comport or to confirm what he says? No. Didn't he tell us that there's a woman in the car with him? Right? He said there was a young lady in the car with him. Someone that allegedly was at both trips, the June and the July trip. Someone that would have potentially corroborated his testimony. There are issues upon issues that I've asked you guys to consider. And things that I want you to look at, and really talk about, and think about. Because as jurors, you bring your real life experience, your knowledge, and your common sense. Okay? And I know it's a lot. And I know there's a lot of pressure. There's probably no bigger duty for a juror to have to serve on a death penalty case. I get it. It's a lot. So what we're asking you is to listen to what I said and consider it and talk about it amongst each other. And ask yourselves, do I feel comfortable convicting Sigfredo Garcia of a murder based on the evidence? based on the lack of physical evidence, based on the uncredible testimony of Luis Rivera, based on the fact that they believe the motivation came from a person that my client despised. Is it there? Beyond a reasonable doubt, to find guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, it's a very high standard. We do that because the foundation of this criminal justice system is to protect people, to make sure that when a jury of his peers makes a determination that you have such an abiding feeling of guilt that your thoughts do not waver or vacillate. That means for a second that you don't go, you know what, I don't feel comfortable with this. I don't understand why there's holes here. I don't understand why he would do this. Look at the chart and realize that if you believe that he's guilty, you strongly believe it, that's not enough. If you think it's likely that he's guilty, that's not enough. And the chart goes on and on and on. We ask you guys to listen to me because this matters. Okay? We understand it's a high-profile case. We understand that the media's been here and people are chomping to get to the Adelsons. I mean, clearly the government is. They spent the first 20 minutes of their opening on it, and let me tell you, rightfully so. Rightfully so. I would venture to say there's substantially more evidence against the Adelsons there than there is against Sigfredo Garcia. Substantially more. Motivation, documentation, ability, more. Much more. Yet, here we are. And here is your duty and your task. When you review the jury instructions, take into consideration the discussions that we've had. Look at things independently. Okay? Be skeptical. Be talkative. Have discussions. Don't jump because the government says jump. Question things. That's what you're supposed to do. That's what you do in real life. Kind of like when someone says, hey, you want to kill someone for $100 grand? Where's this money coming from? And like I said, ask the right questions. Do the right thing. And I'll tell you, at the end of the day, come back with, I'm not interested in buying this house. Come back with the right verdict. Thank you guys for your attention.
All right, we're going to break for lunch. Let's try to, I want to kind of try to keep this moving. Let's try to be back at 1:30. That's a little less than an hour. I think you ought to be able to do that. So let's be back, ready to go at 1:30. Either side, anything?
No, sir.
I guess we need to discuss your instructions just a second. Everybody be seated. I gave you a new version and I emailed it to you. I think the only change of substance is in the second paragraph of the aggravation of felony by carrying a firearm. I think it would only have application to defendant Garcia, but that second paragraph was kind of mixed up. It did not track the standard instructions, so I've made that change. Any objection to that, Mr. Singleton?
I'm sorry, Judge.
Okay. Okay.
No objection.
I mean, a copy was given to you, yes.
Yes, Judge. I used it in my closing. Thank you.
All right. The other changes were more technical than anything. There was some things where it should have been plural, where it was singular, vice versa. Was there something you wanted to be heard on, Ms. Claus?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. You looked over the minor changes I made.
I mean, I looked over the jury instructions that were read this morning, but the only change that was made was the technical pluralities, which I...
Look over those. If anybody has objection, let me know. I think you'll find there was, I guess, only on the right to remain silent. I was not thinking actually the first paragraph applies to both defendants, not just to Mr. Garcia, so I made that plural. The second paragraph of that only applies to Mr. Garcia, but that was, I think that was one of 3 changes. There were technical changes I made. All right, have a good lunch, 1:30.